let's put it like this. We did what we came to do. Okay. There, let's not. I mean, you can look at season 14, the premiere, you see us running out of the tank. So I'm not saying anything that's not available in the public domain. But what I found was sometimes when you're so far in the future, it can be hard, when you're a visionary, it can be hard to paint the picture of what it's going to be like because it's so far away, it seems, from the world that people are living in right now.
Hey everybody, welcome back to Tech Pathways, where we highlight the innovators, the disruptors, and the change makers that are shaping the digital world that we're stepping into actively every day. Today's guest is seriously next level. She's a futurist, a founder, a technologist, and thought leader. She is known as the Oprah of Tech, which if you know anything about me, you know that I love Oprah, so I love that label. And she's named one of the top 50 most influential people in crypto worldwide. She's spoken everywhere from the Harvard Kennedy School to Meta, co-founded a Web3 startup that's flipping the script on crypto education, and created a mindset training called Authentic Intelligence that's literally changing corporate culture. And the world. And did I mention that she's a proud Haitian-American and a poetic disruptor at heart? Please help me welcome to the show a good friend and one of the best human beings in the world, Lisa Francoeur.
Wow. I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm so touched. Thank you for that. Unbelievable. I was like, when you were saying the things, I was like, damn, that person sounds dope. So thank
That's you.
you for putting me in a thing.
Yeah. Lisa, I'm so excited to have you because we us meeting was so serendipitous. Like there was such a cool aspect to it. Like number one, to kind of share with folks that are listening, we met on accident, right? Like we were at a restaurant, like backs turned to each other, and like halfway through our meal, we just like looked over and we were like, oh my god, like because you were with someone, a mutual friend, and we connected, and I think it was like instant like chemistry, in part because we actually have a lot in common. Like we both work at this intersection of tech and community. Both of us have curated and done work with the Kennedy Center, and so I knew from the moment I met you, I was like, this is one of my people. And I knew that we wanted to have you on this podcast. I knew that I wanted to get to know you more and share all of your amazing work with as many people as possible. So I really am genuinely excited to have you. And like something else that needs to be fully included into your intro is the fact that your style every single day slays everybody. Like you are phenomenal. Like your style is incredible. Yeah, like on point every single day, 24/7. I love it. But I'm just excited for the conversation, and I hope you are too.
Yeah, can you see? I couldn't even sit down. I was like, first of all, when you smile so much and it like hurts here. So there's
Yeah.
that already. And we've like, what is it, 2 seconds in? Um,
Mm,
I'm just so touched by the fact that we are kindred spirits. And to your point around serendipitous encounters, I'm very mindful of how chain reactions unfold. And I think that by one domino falling, Lily Gangas, my Hermana, I call her slicker than your average savage because, I have a whole clique called the Savage Royals. They're savage in their domains and exercise full dominion. And I respect the gangsters. But saying that to say, she introduced us, and we were at South by Southwest. We
hmm
were in Austin, and we were at this fabulous restaurant. And I'm a pescatarian, so I have a very particular palate, and that's just who I am. We'll see what happens in terms of how long I can keep this intact, but it's working. So we had that fabulous meal. It was like a Michelin-rated restaurant that we stumbled upon,
hmm
and
hmm
saying all
And we ran into the owner.
yeah, well, he ran
Like,
to us, he came to us. So
that's
again,
right.
in the vein of kindred spirits, right? And that synchronistic chain reaction flow, energy flow. And so not to get off on a tangent already, but just to level set as far as how critical those chance encounters are. Because as we get into the conversation, we're going to talk about what we're doing to ensure that there's a better tomorrow today.
Oh my gosh. I don't think there's anything chance about it either. I really do think it was like it was it was an introduction that was meant to be. And I actually like I walked away with two amazing new friends from that conversation. You and Pavlo, who was a stranger that we just happened to sit next to.
I still
Um,
talk to Pablo. Oh, I can't wait
yeah,
to, for Pablo to hear this, see
yeah.
this. That's my guy.
Yeah. Shout out
He is
Pablo. He's
so.
he's partying
Oh,
it up
he just
at
had his birthday too.
yes, he just had his birthday. Happy birthday, Pablo.
Yep.
And he's partying it up right now at Coachella.
Coachella. Yep. You know I
Yeah.
know because we are real friends. Like, and that was another thing. I'm so excited because although there's a lot of, and we'll get into it, issues in the world that would make us be justified in our demoralization, be justified in our hopelessness, be justified in losing faith in humanity. Not to say that I don't understand why people would feel that way, but the only way to go is up. So how are we
Yeah.
discussing what we're doing and enacting and working to make better in perpetuity, which we'll get into authentic intelligence, but what are we doing different to make it better? That's it in short.
Yeah, it 100%. I want to kick off the conversation because we have so much that we could, you and I could talk forever. I genuinely believe that there's so much we could talk about and so many topics to explore. Like, we could make a whole podcast just around like Jose and Lisa getting into it, right? We really could.
And use my stage name,
Yeah,
Fancyfied.
um, exactly. Do you go by Lisa Fancified or just Fancified?
You know what? It depends really. Like my friends will call me fancy. It's like a term of
Okay.
endearment. I was a fashion stylist and I had the name Fancy Pants, and then people just eventually started calling me Fancy, and that stuck. And then eventually I came up with this fancified, as like an adverb. It's like, oh, you're fancified, like, but you got fancified. It's, kind of like Google. It's like,
Okay.
anyway. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, so saying that to say my friends will call me Fancy, people call me Lisa, or Fancyfied. People call me, they'll straight up call me Fancyfied. So whatever you feel most comfortable with.
Okay. I'm digging Fancyfied. I like that a lot. Um, I wanna I wanna start at the top because I do think when having these conversations, it's so important to ground ourselves in roots, identity, those early influences. And so I want to hear more about you coming from a Haitian family, originally from Jérémie, aka the city
From
of
Port-au-Prince,
poets.
the city
Mm-hmm.
of poets. Yes. So my mom's side is from Miami, the city of poets in Haiti. And then my father's side is from Port-au-Prince, which is the capital of Haiti.
Mm. So I know being of origin when you're connected to a place that's known as the city of poets, there has to be an inspiration there. Like you have to be shaped by that and the community that you're coming from. So how has that shaped you? How would you say that those early starts, those origins have shaped you?
Wow. The irony is, and this is where I think the intersection of destiny and fate, like this is where it sits. I did not know that I knew my family was from Miami, but I did not know what that meant in terms of the reputation it had. It was something that I knew in terms of location, but not in terms of like what it signified. So, ironically, it wasn't until I was doing my Kennedy Center residency, I was talking to a music professor and like world renowned musician. He told me, he's like, wait, your family's from Miami? And I was like, yeah. And he was like, that's the city of poets, right? So it's bloodline. And I was like, no, no, I did not know. And of course I had to go and look it up and make sure that, but thank God for that tidbit because I realized at that point it was bloodline. I realized at
Mm.
that point, I always say, Jose, like being Haitian is encoded like revolution is I had no idea until I did, but I was a poet from the time I was born. Like as soon as I could write, I would write poems. And for me, it was just a cathartic mechanism to be like seen and heard and feel safe and give myself things that weren't as accessible.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's really, there is something so rich about the cultural identity. And like a quick history lesson for the folks that don't know, one of my areas of background is Latin American studies. And I think I was really fortunate enough at the very beginning of that education to come to understand that the movement for revolution and liberation in this continent was started in Haiti. And that's something that a lot of, yeah, that's something that a lot of folks don't don't remember, right? Or are not taught, unfortunately. But there is something really, really powerful about that statement to say that like revolution is in your DNA, right? I know that story of like where did the first few like South American republics go to for like support in their revolutionary efforts? They went to Haiti. Like Haiti helped.
We sent,
Yeah.
we sent troops, well, we sent generals, we had advisors that we would deploy. I mean, and not to cut you off, but this is something near and dear to my heart. And, I don't think that when people, I mean, this is just what it is. People don't assume that I'm Haitian. When you look at
Mm.
me, the first thing is never Haitian, and I can tell you this for years and years and years that I've been on this earth. That's not what I'm, thought to be. And so I'm so mindful of just owning that identity because, for me, I have a responsibility given my heritage to continue to, you know, how do you say, like emancipate, like
Hmm.
emancipate for real.
Hmm.
And like I am in the most disruptive of industries in every single, way. Like we talked a little bit about my poetry and what have you, but like, I'm hard body tech. Like I've had decades in the tech game. I sold
Hmm.
enterprise software from Fortune, 100s to startups in the New York tech ecosystem. And I've been embedded in disruption for, a long, long time. So, in one of my poems, I say, disruption, disruptor, and being Haitian with that revolutionary energy and being in the midst of the fourth industrial revolution, the World Economic Forum has clearly, marked this era and couldn't have done so more appropriately in light of the digital revolution that we're experiencing with
Yeah.
the onslaught of AI and so on. So not to get ahead of myself, but just to kind of marry how, marry the understanding, like really hone in on the understanding of your identity, and your heritage and how much strength you can draw. And that's what it means when you draw strength from your ancestors. You got to represent for the
I think that's so, actually, I think that's so appropriate to mention now because my follow-up question to that was going to be how does that energy and like that revolution in the DNA show up with you every day in your work? I think you just named it. It really is the fact that we are living through one of the most transformative times in human history with the really the day-to-day like development and evolution of our digital world, to your point, like the new industrial revolution, so many conversations around what is the future of work, what is the future of human interaction, how we're engaging. AI is doing so much in terms of the landscape that we're operating in. And then, not to kind of dive into other policy topics, but then you have things like quantum computing that are right around the corner that are bringing in, untold growth in the way that we're able to process information and advance. Like we are living through a very transformative time, and I do think that these like experiences that we have that are inherited, that are familial, they prepare us for these moments, to live in these moments. And so I think you actually describe it really beautifully. I think that's like perfectly well said. Um, Creativity is clearly a big part of who you are. You do so much work, and to your point, like you're an artist. You bring, I think, this beauty to your work in the way that you're able to engage with everybody around you. But you're also a tech baddie. Like you are doing
I know
a
my
lot.
shit.
Yeah.
I'm not a dev, but I know enough to be dangerous. Like I'm a technologist hardcore.
So exactly. So like how does all of that shape your mission as a person in tech?
Well, I honestly, it's very clear for me. I have a vision, mission, value, that I live my life by. I wouldn't even call it a statement. It's more of a lifestyle. And I have a vision of scaling empowerment globally, and it's a very abstract concept. It's a big idea. It's something, the gravitas associated with scaling empowerment globally. We don't typically hear those two words in the same sentence, empowerment and scaling, And so that even goes to show you um, you know, uh the composition of like my entity, and how, I'm leveraging my left brain and my right brain in a symbiotic way to not only come up with new ideas, but to synthesize new ideas. Creative synthesis is really, really important. Creative synthesis
Mm,
is the combination of different ideas in order to create an even better idea, and that's how I operate. So when I talk about scaling empowerment globally, we'll start with Crypto Tutors. um, you mentioned I have a Web3 education company. Well, I have a B2B Web3 education company, in more detail, which is partnered with corporations, Fortune 500s, from Microsoft to Block, AWS, Fidelity, etc. Like we've done a tremendous amount of work in the corporate space, partnership wise, to drive education, to drive the responsible onboarding of originally employees at these companies to their community, their customer communities, to we're on a tour right now, a collegiate tour, bringing the education to one of the communities that we see have and hold crypto at one of the highest amounts, which is the Black community, but doesn't, the Black and Brown community, but isn't necessarily involved in the conversation politically, which is something that
mm,
we share, which is another thing I'm raising awareness about,
mhm.
civic engagement. But also, the potential of the technology. So, the idea of scaling empowerment globally lends itself to thinking about, okay, what are the practical applications? So, with Crypto Tutors, the practical applications in that context, Jose, is being able to teach people about how these technologies are evolving. We specialize in emerging tech. Web3 is our domain of expertise, which encompasses blockchain. We're projecting even 2030, by 2030, not only 40 million jobs based on PwC data, but about $2.3 billion in education, blockchain education, by 2030. So I'm giving you some idea about how scaling empowerment globally applies in a practical context. So Crypto Tutors
Mm,
is about education, globally onboarding the masses to the world of Web3, teaching them about the practical use cases above and beyond crypto, which is the most commercialized. Great
mhm.
to have an investment strategy. We're seeing a lot of traction in relation to the political framing of that industry. But the point is that you've got financial empowerment wrapped into that. You've got, how do you say, teaching people to fish by virtue of
Yeah.
becoming ready for jobs of the future. Um,
Mhm.
so not to go off on a tangent, but my point is practical application of scaling empowerment globally. Then,
Yeah.
I'm Fancyfied. And this is, more, I think, right-brained in that
Mm,
the Fancyfied, what that is an innovation lab of mindset engineering. And again, right, this kind of convergence of tech terminology and yourself, like you as the individual, right? And so authentic intelligence, which I'll talk about, but this idea of an innovation lab of mindset engineering, like your mindset is an operating system. And if the program is telling you to do shit that is not resulting in the results you want to see, you got to modify the program. You know what I mean? You got to do an upgrade, basically, is what I'm trying to say. And I'm using these terms that help people remove the emotion from the process of self-evaluation so that they can make the changes that they want to see. And I put that in a program that people can, subscribe to. We're going to launch soon, called Authentic Intelligence. Bring your whole self to life.
that was actually going to be my question. Is all of that tied into like authentic intelligence? So I'm excited to dive into that a little bit as well. Um, I have a question though, because I am actually, and I think it's really cool because there's a reframing, right? And like I think therapy teaches us that there's reframing is important for folks to really be able to process certain things and identify maybe limitations that they're operating with, that they need to that they need to tackle, but in a way that they can remove themselves to identify some of these situations first. So I actually really love the concept. But I have a question for you before we jump into some of the tech and crypto tutors and Web3 conversation. A little birdie told us that you started out as a child model, and I'm really interested
Oh,
um,
that
how
is a what do you call it? Curveball. That I was not expecting that. Did you put
um,
that in this?
I think yeah, I think so. I think so because it's I have it here as a section, and the question for me is, how did that? Because you are such like when you speak, I think people want to listen. Like you are so you command attention so well. Like it's really like, oh my gosh, like what are you saying? Like I know it's going to be something amazing. Is there something about the spotlight, that early spotlight, that you think really helped you like have that confidence, find that like sense of identity that like you harness so well today?
That's such an interesting question. You're right. So a little backstory. My sister, she was the one who was, how do you say, discovered, right? My sister was, she's 7 years older than me. And, she was the model. And when I was born, 7 years later, as I mentioned, I was just, like brought into it because she was already in it. So I didn't necessarily have the desire or even know what was really going on, but, I was in New York City and I was like going to auditions. And, this was like, many years ago in New York City. And it still was like very kind of grimy. You know what I mean? It was like kind of like just a lot of like social deviance.
Yeah.
But I say that to say, it was like me, my mom, and my sister, and I'm like 3 years old, let's say. My sister's 10. My mom is, my mom. And we're navigating subways and we are navigating, auditions, going to different parts of the city. And although I didn't understand as a kid, you are evaluated, right? Like there's, competition, right? Other models are looking for that same, position and what have you. I didn't necessarily understand that, to the extent obviously that I do now, but it was a very interesting, I guess you could say, breeding ground because a few things, right? It did put me on a pedestal, literally. I was a model. So, I would actually be standing on like, things like, like
Yeah.
So I say that to say, and I had cameras in my face, like from the time that I was pretty much born. And it didn't occur to me actually until now, really, which is why it's such a like aha moment that good interviewing, good interviewing. That had a lot to do, yeah, kudos to Jose. That had a lot to do with like how I'm shaped as a person because, from modeling, which taught me even about work ethic, right? Like I'm young. I'm like 2, 3. I remember more so from like 3 to 5, 3 to 6, and so on. But as a youth and going on, like you understand that this is a job that you have to get, and there's something that you get after you get the job, and you can obviously see the photos or the commercial or what have you after the fact.
Hmm.
So it's something tangible. They're like, oh wow,
Yeah.
it's me. And that was another thing of like reckoning, where it's like, oh, I see how I'm being used in a sense to market a product. I'm selling
Mm.
clothes, I'm
Yeah.
selling electronics or whatever it was. And so really for me, where I noticed that something was very different about me was when I spoke, and maybe this is like the poet or what have you, or maybe even you go on auditions and it's like you're a job interview, literally. Okay. So yes, I'm 3, but 4 or 5, but they're asking me questions. How old are you, Lisa? How's it going? So you're learning how to speak in a way where
Hmm.
you have to sell yourself, which is another thing I
Yeah.
didn't discover until this moment. So great job on digging deep.
Oh my gosh. I strive to be like Oprah Winfrey because I have been watching Oprah since I was a kid. So that is like I thank you. I appreciate that. We're getting there, slowly but surely.
No one has ever asked me that. And I get, not to be like, I get interviewed a lot, but I've done a lot of this and no one has ever asked me that.
You know what it reminds me of? if it's okay to pull the narrative a little bit, it reminds me of, because I don't think everyone processes the same way. I think a lot of folks that are exposed to industry, to that pressure, to some of these spaces very young, don't always process it really well. And unfortunately, I think we see that sometimes. But two people come to mind, Kiki Palmer and Raven Simone, right? Two incredible women who their lives, their professional identities, and the way that they were like, had to understand that they were in sales and that their physical selves were a part of like what they were selling as actresses at such a young age. There's this really like strong sense of self. Like both women in the public eye, I think really know who they are. They know who they are. They know what they want out of life. They know, like, they're just, you look at them and you're like, you're a grounded human being. And I get that same sense from you. And I imagine that it has to be in part because of those early experiences, right? I think that's really fascinating.
You know what's interesting? I mean, honestly, I think for me, I got a lot of what I give what I never got a lot of the times, because I think that one of the challenges with life and the meaning of it, in my humble opinion, is understanding that hardships are meant to harden your resilience. Like they're not meant to break you, they're meant to mold you. And it's hard to
Yeah.
kind of, hmm?
Oh, I was just saying yes.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah, but they're meant to harness you. Hardships are meant to harness. And it's a painful process, yes, but the Buddha says pain is inevitable and suffering is optional. So, dwelling in the suffering is lamenting over what cannot change. And it kind of brings me to, one of my philosophies, which is trauma not transformed is trauma transferred. Okay. I'm looking at the camera when I say this. Trauma not
Mm,
transformed is trauma transferred. And I think the onus is on a lot of us, especially like immigrants, the challenges of coming into this country, the ancestral, luggage that comes with. It's important to understand the role and the agency you wield in not perpetuating that trauma and being a pattern breaker in that resolve, but introducing new patterns that are healthier. And by the grace of God, as you can see, I've done a lot of work on healing and just identifying areas of improvement. And that's part of what I like to invite people to the party of excellence. It's like, this is tough, this is hard. I could go on and on about abuse this and just like, challenge that. But it's like I look at it as opportunities to grow, as catalysts in my own, radical sometimes, but positive transformation.
yeah. I, I, I'm so moved by the way that you like channel your energy and paint this picture of like positivity, transformation. I think that that word, right? Evolution, transformation, revolution. These are like common words that we're talking about that I think really speak to the work that you're doing and the impact of the work. Um,
It's always so interesting, Jose, because like, it's funny sometimes when I'm like I get surprised and I'm like, people know, they know the work that I do. I'm like, you know what I do? It's like, whoa, because it's not necessarily about the accolades associated with the work, it's the work. You know what I mean? I'm not sitting up here talking about scaling empowerment globally and not at least based on how I live my life, the choices that I make day in, day out, being the embodiment of that vision. That's why I
mm,
have such conviction and I can speak with such a sense of power and authority and certainty because I say what I mean and I mean what I say. And people can, Google me if they really want to know what that means.
yeah. Yeah. Well, I wanna jump into the tech of it. I think folks are getting a strong sense of like who you are as a human, and I want that because I knew that I wanted that to be a big part of this conversation because I think it's so magnificent. I want to know and get into the conversation on crypto tutors and the Web3 revolution. I want to know, right? Like you co-founded Crypto Tutors to make crypto more approachable, accessible, to speak to communities that we know make up, right? Like a large portion of folks that are holding cryptocurrencies that want this information, right? What sparked that idea? And what gap were you trying to fill? What problem were you trying to address as you formed Crypto Tutors?
Okay, well, a couple of things. I started my career in tech haphazardly. I talked earlier about like selling enterprise software for, startups in New York to, ultimately getting recruited to LinkedIn. And it was interesting because I was like, a lot of the times we don't have the pedigree as far as like the institution we go to, we don't go to a Harvard or Yale, what have you. Or we do not have the network. And because I had spent years in tech, I think I was 7 years before I got recruited to go to LinkedIn. But because I had that track record, I was found on the LinkedIn platform. And what was interesting was that I got the email, got on the call, and of course, the hiring manager looks at my network to see who I know, to see if I'm really about that like enterprise software life. And
Mm-hmm.
tip to everybody who's listening in, like looking at the network gives a lot of understanding about who you are. So be mindful of building those connections and what have you. So the hiring manager is like, oh, Eric. And I was like, that was like my old manager. And I was like, yeah, ask Eric about me. And by virtue of him, asking Eric and Eric being like, you should at least meet her. Like you should they brought me in for an interview and the rest is history. That changed the trajectory of my life. So I say that to say selling tech at the highest level of like the upper echelon of the industry. I was a part of like Microsoft's acquisition of LinkedIn. But my point in mentioning all this is that, what I noticed throughout my career was that there was a barrier to entry. It wasn't just a lack of representation and there was an awareness issue. There was an aptitude issue. There wasn't, also a lot of representation in tech that got me thinking, hmm, this is such a phenomenal industry. I've been in this industry. I'm not a unicorn in and of myself. There's a lot of other folks like me. And I always had that in the back of my mind. But honestly, Jose, I also have been very mindful of inclusion, like I really do rock with humanity. Even though humanity disappoints me on so many occasions, I just still look for, the like best in people and try to bring that out of them. So my point in mentioning that as well is like, bringing people together and recognizing that harnessing the power of this technology is what our responsibility and duty is. We can, as good practitioners, use it for good or for bad. It's just like elements, like fire, right? So saying all that to say as well, in relation to crypto tutors, I had always had a penchant for like having, everybody having a seat at the table, like understanding that there was a democratization of access to wealth and wealth building, to entrepreneurship in tech at large, which has created the most amount of like, millionaires of any other industry. But as I started to see how the emerging aspects of tech were unfolding, I also saw a lot of opportunity to build. I saw a lot of opportunity, like what the foundation in like software as a service, for example, like that foundation had that groundwork had already been laid. That the SEO, like that had already been established. But where's the opportunity? Where the white space is? Where we're starting out, and that was one of the most attractive parts about crypto,
Mm-hmm.
because I, being from having family from Haiti, remittances, sending money back to my family members in Haiti, and anyone who's listening to this. I mean, you mentioned your immigrant background as well. Like,
Mm-hmm.
we send money home, and in Haiti, it's like 20% of the GDP, 20% of the GDP, which is
Wow.
astronomical, but that's the reality. And so to have what's sent be, you know, cannibalized by fees, for what reason? Because you're going through a Western Union, you're going through a MoneyGram, it's like predatory practices. So, thankfully, I realized after meeting my third co-founder, this gentleman named Moeti Nubi, who's Zimbabwe American, of course, familiar with remittances. Also,
Mm-hmm.
yes, hyperinflation. In
Mm.
Zimbabwe, the Zimbabwe dollar, I think it was called, $1 trillion note couldn't even buy you bread. So like these are real world problems.
Mhm.
Well, our Nina Blankenship, our CEO at Crypto Tutors and co-founder, and also my best friend, honestly. I mean, like her and I've been rocking for over a decade. We met at LinkedIn on orientation day, and we just
Oh.
knew that we were special. So saying,
Mm.
kind of laying the groundwork in aligning with people of like minds, we recognize the best of tech, why not use it? And then in that use case that I gave, I think real world applications is vital so that people can see it's not tech for tech's sake. It's like, how do you use it to actually add value? And if you
Yeah.
could do that in this capacity, like sending money faster with less fees, that's a win-win. That's a
Mm.
win-win. So anyway, understanding how to onboard yourself into this game is very tricky. So
Yeah.
when Nina and I, with Moeti's encouragement, attempted to implement the steps to buy Bitcoin, which by the way, at this time was $11,000. And two, the objective, interestingly enough, because there's in the US stablecoin legislation pending that that'll actually provide regulation and policy around stablecoin. We'll talk about that in a minute. But the objective was to buy Bitcoin to buy this stablecoin. Now, Jose, here's where it gets interesting and the world of decentralization gets exciting. You can become your own bank in a decentralized financial environment. I'll explain what that means from a technical standpoint, but
Mhm.
what I'm saying here is by providing liquidity to the exchange, you get rewards. And when you provide liquidity, you do a processing called staking, and then you get to partake in the profit share from the fees that are collected from each transaction. And that
Mm.
staking is how you make money while you sleep. And the best part about it is that there's a compounding effect. So, yeah, and we
That's
couldn't
really interesting.
and we couldn't do it. It was mad hard. And so we realized if we can't do it and we're technical, other people can't do it. And that was the genesis of Crypto Tutors.
That's really interesting because you're right. Like there are so many voices online who tell you you know,
So many
like
bad actors.
yes, so many. And that's a conversation I have with a lot of folks because I think there are so many blossoming communities where, like we see first generation Americans, they have their generation, like first generation to second generation, very large increases in standard of living, household income, educational attainment. They are blossoming communities. And they're wondering, like, where do we go for that opportunity?
Yeah,
Right. And I
because
think
you want to go where things are growing and expanding, not where they're contracting. That's why I call that
yeah.
out. Because I'm like, look, this is the early, like, we're not even, maybe, I don't even know if you would consider where we are in the first inning. We might just be in the first inning of this 9 inning game. That's why it's so exciting because it's like, look, we have an opportunity to, like, sorry, let me not, but I have to finish this thought. We have an
Oh,
opportunity.
no, go ahead. I'm gonna add to it. Go ahead.
This is super important. We have a tremendous opportunity
Yeah.
to, again, apply the logic of using technology for good. I used one example of, the remittances scenario. I told you about staking and this idea of making money while you sleep.
Mm.
There are so many different strategies to navigate, including a borrow and lending strategy that offers a crypto equity line of credit. Typically, when you need liquidity, you will sell something, and sometimes people will sell their homes. They'll go to a bank, they'll get a home equity line of credit, but the percentages of that interest rate could be significantly high depending upon, the bank and what have you. And interestingly enough, Black people, sorry I had to call this out, but it is the reality. There are studies that prove they have higher interest rates for their mortgages. So saying that to say, if there are better systems and you have the technical aptitude to use those systems, it behooves us, like to learn. Like it's a necessity
Yeah.
to learn. And so what I'm saying is that this emerging tech world has a lot of opportunity that if we don't understand how to use it, we're not going to understand how to solve problems that
Um,
affect us with it.
100%. I'm actually gonna throw a statistic out there that I think contextualizes the opportunity in a different way around Gen Z specifically. right? I mean, Zeta, that's our work, Gen Z tech, really educating our community as that emerging and initial digital native generation that grew up with the digital world. Right now, Gen Z, that age range is more or less from like 13, 14 to like 27, 28. So about, folks that are like high school to like entering the workforce, young professionals. They are smaller than every generation before them, like in terms of numbers in the US, if you look at just the US. But they already make up over 50% of all online purchases every year. Already.
They're
So
digital
they,
native though.
right, because they're digital natives. And so the power that emphasizes around, digital exchanges, cryptocurrencies, when you think about that generation still being so young, making up over 50% of all online transactions already, right? And what that has done to the ecosystem of these online transactions. And the fact that that spending power is going to go for that generation from just under $400 billion dollars annually right now, with half of them still children, to over $11 trillion dollars a year in the next decade. That tells you something about the value and the growth of digital transactions and the ecosystem for the digital economy and where we're moving. And so I think it is so important to have folks like Crypto Tutors because, like, this space, this digital ecosystem, digital economy, these digital transactions are not going to go down. On the contrary, they are going to continue to explode as this generation moves forward as digital citizens, and everybody else behind us does too.
And to that point, I mean, look, to your, around the digital native, the metaverse is a real live thing. And what I mean by the metaverse is like virtual reality. And you've got Oculus, you're starting to see how augmented reality and virtual reality is merging, right? And we're developing the devices to make it accessible to the masses. So just a quick stat regarding the metaverse, because when you think about Roblox, and how that parlays into Web3, you think of Fortnite and the idea of buying skins. There's already embedded within these virtual realities economies.
Hmm.
And these economies are not obviously, physical. They're digital, but for, the Gen Z world, that is their world. They interact, they, have go to concerts. I mean, like there was a Travis Scott concert in Fortnite, you know what I mean, a couple years back. So it's like
Hmm.
virtual worlds are how that demographic, one of the major ways that they are leveraging this technology. So when we think about adoption, to reach a point of critical mass, obviously there needs to be more awareness, which is what we've been championing at Crypto Tutors. But the interesting thing is, even in terms of the play to earn, a couple of years back with game, protocols like Axie, Axie, it was, and Gala Games is another one. You can literally play games and earn crypto, and that can be converted to currency. Where in the Philippines, for example, people were making livable wages. So
Yeah.
this is all about, in effect, I think, creating your own economy. How do you create your own economy? Even our digital identity in the Web 2.0 world. So social media platforms like Meta, Snap, they own your digital identity. And so they can
Hmm.
commoditize your identity by virtue of the data that they're capturing with all of your interactions on their platform. And there's no portability. You cannot move from, Snap to, Instagram or what have you. And so
Hmm.
again, going back to this idea of creating our own economy and just understanding the mechanics behind what that looks like in the third iteration of the internet, you have your digital identity that you can monetize through the selling of your data. There are platforms like Ocean Protocol, for example, that allow you to choose what data points, if any, you sell. You have platforms. There's a couple of social media platforms. I'll look up just to double check. But basically, your intellectual property, you can commoditize your intellectual property. So if you're contributing to the platform, perhaps it's, music, it's an artistic expression of some sort. You can, being that you own it, you can literally use it and you can sell it however you see fit. You can fractionalize it. So all I'm saying to you is this notion of economic motion, this notion of economic
Mm.
motion. These technologies are creating environments and ecosystems that allow us to be empowered. They call it the own era of the internet. Now, Crypto
Yeah.
Tutors, you can see, has been very embedded in this new world. I mentioned maybe earlier, if I didn't, 4.5, 5 years, working with corporations and developing, I like to say, Fortune 500 battle tested curriculum. We've evolved to, we developed a SaaS platform for we call it a hub for emerging tech workforce readiness and development to fast track
Mm.
employment. And it's not like no one has ever attempted to do that, but what's different about our patent pending tech is that we are mindful of how the engagement on the platform leads to better outcomes. How do you
Mm.
structure the user experience in a way that we talked about employment opportunities facilitate that, like we're creating more frictionless experiences through an assessment, through upskilling, through application-based learning, through connection with corporations and institutions that are hiring for these roles. It's a beautiful flywheel, and because of that, we're creating scalability in relation to how education in emerging tech is being rolled out globally. Like that's the big vision, to be the gold standard for emerging tech education.
Wow, that's really phenomenal to think about. And like the applications are so fascinating because like I was listening to a podcast recently where someone was talking about precisely that, right? Like ownership of data, particularly around like AI systems and the way that they're being trained, these like LLM models, the way that they're being trained and the way that they get access to data and what it means to be a player in that space as someone who with that creativity as an author, as a musician, as someone creating unique content, can have agency over the data that these models are learning off of as we face some limits in the way that these models are able to pull from existing content, right?
So if I may, one other thing I wanted to say, blockchain is the underlying technical infrastructure that stands up, crypto. The only
Mm.
way that Bitcoin can operate and function is through, is through blockchain. And for
Mm-hmm.
those of you that don't know what blockchain really is, um, you know, it's just a digital ledger. It is
Mm.
a mechanism to capture and index information with a structure that has, depending upon the blockchain, like we'll use Bitcoin as an example, it has a what's called a consensus mechanism. So it has, basically a network of independent computers that anyone really who has what they call the mining equipment, anyone can download the, Bitcoin code, and then they themselves can get up and running as a miner. In this context, a minor means that they're a part of the validation mechanism to determine if information is accurate before it is captured and
Mm.
put on chain. It's like there is a checks and balances, again, in the vein of a digital ledger. It's like there's a check and balance mechanism with all these, computers all over the world. They operate independently. They calculate these complex mathematical equations, and they have to arrive at a consensus before a data, a block of data literally is validated. And that goes back to the
Mm-hmm.
idea of a consensus mechanism. Bitcoin is a
Mm.
consensus protocol. And because
Yeah.
um, you know, these computers that are having to go through this process of calculation, arriving at a conclusion, are independent, that's where the decentralization comes into play. That's where no one can game the system because they all have to arrive at the same answer. And if they don't, then it's not validated. Now, the reason why
Mm.
it is such a phenomenon is because we talk about Bitcoin and currency, but think about it like this. In the world of decentralized science, typically what happens is that research and, R&D, research and development, is housed in these closed systems, repositories that are gated by big pharma, let's say, universities. But in the third iteration of the internet, there's an opportunity, again, real world application, in the vein of decentralized science, to share, create an open source mechanism where, we can expedite the process of finding the cure to cancer. Because if we're able to disseminate the information freely so people can work and apply that creative synthesis, as I mentioned at
Hmm.
the beginning, then again, this is another way that we can solve real world problems through the collective, not just the collective consciousness, but the collective genius.
I think that's something so important to mention because that application of like blockchain technology is really going hand in hand with the way that we're thinking about AI as a tool that helps us expedite some of this research, right?
I'm
Um,
sorry, Jose, real quick. So sorry.
yeah.
Jose, this is what I was going to say to you. I use the Bitcoin example as an analogy because what I was going to say about the world of AI is having a mechanism to validate the legitimacy of the information that the AI is spitting out. There has to be a mechanism. And so blockchain lends itself to that because you can have a decentralized blockchain to cross-reference that the data has a validation mechanism. You see what I'm saying? So
Mm-hmm.
that with that, smart, not to get too technical, but you can have it structured in a way where if these boxes are not checked, the data won't be considered validated and it won't spit out that hallucination
Yeah,
or that
exactly.
bias because there was
Right.
a mechanism in place to ensure that it met this criteria before it culled that data in order to give you an answer. So
Yeah.
AI and blockchain, that intersection is very powerful, even in terms of the payment rails. Eventually, we'll get to a point in AI's evolution where everybody will have an independent agent, and there will be a way that you compensate the agent for the computing power required to process the action. And so
Mm-hmm.
blockchain can create the payment rails. It has the payment structure to facilitate that. So you're seeing AI and blockchain, coming together in a very symbiotic dynamic. And we're just really scratching the surface here. But I'm just telling you how these technologies can also sit on top of each other.
I mean, think about the potential there if we want to take it a step further with, the ability to then insert those technologies and systems and the payment structures that could accompany that into those like physical robot technologies that we're looking at now, right? Where we have like this desire to get to a point where we're engaging with humanoid robots that are carrying out services and tasks and providing aid to people in different ways, right, in their life. I think there's really like a foundation laying for what will be like a human interaction with the digital world in a virtual sense and in a physical sense that we're just barely starting to imagine, but is really not too far away. I do think that, particularly speaking to Gen Z, like these are technologies and evolutions and transformations that we're going to see in our lifetime, 100%.
The age range for that demographic, they're like what? Like they go up to like 20.
Uh, the oldest Gen Z are 28. And I think about the analogy of like flight, right? I was at the Air and Space Museum not that long ago, actually with some of our team members. And we passed an exhibit that talked about the Wright brothers and their flight. It took us 66 years. I might be off by like 2 or 3 years. It took us like 60 years approximately to go from human beings figuring out how to get off the ground to getting to the moon. And that to me, like, it still gives me chills to think about because where are we in that regard with these technologies, AI, with quantum computing right around the corner, adding infinite possibilities to the way that we're computing and processing information to work in things like healthcare, right? To work on addressing climate issues. Like there's so much application. Um, it's incredible to think about, right? It puts it into perspective how quickly things can evolve.
Why I think it's really important that good stewardship is vital. Good
Mm-hmm.
stewardship in terms of the type of technology that's built, the ethics that it's built with, because at the end of the day, none of this exists without our engineering. And, there is a responsibility to think. in an ethical way about how these things are being created. And this is why
Hmm.
also too, and ethics is a very like sort of controversial, and kind of emotionally charging word. But I say that to say, if people aren't necessarily thinking of people that are not a part of their direct community, the more people that we have building, the more opportunity we have for that creative synthesis also to come together and say, oh, you built that, I built this, oh, if we put this together, this could be some, and it's like really fostering unity, as bizarre maybe as this may sound, but it's like fostering unity because there's a common language, and that common
Hmm.
language is that digital understanding, that digital representation, and how does that representation, if you talk about the financial implications, this idea of creating our own economies, like people come together when they feel that they understand one another, and even in
Yeah.
the movie Ready, Set, Go, I think it was. Ready, Set, Go. God, it's like a cult classic, but they live in this virtual world and no one actually knows what anyone looks like because they have the skins, So
Mm.
and it's just like there's all kinds of like creatures and whatever, and everybody's doing the thing, so it's like that's not an issue for them in this world because they don't even know who they actually are underneath those skins. So my point is that this is actually a really, it could be a like, a revolution that breeds like one of the most incredible, technologically innovative and unifying points in human history, harnessing the power of what seemingly can divide us if we allow the trajectory that we're on to continue.
Well,
That's
I
why
think,
I'm
and that's,
with that voice.
yeah, I mean, you used the word like it's that good stewardship, right? And that's where I think good people with vision come into play. And I think that's where folks like Crypto Tutors come into play because you're good stewards, you have vision, you're leaders that care and feel passionately about the way that we're building that positive digital world.
Let me tell you, man, I sometimes think, if I went back to corporate, I could secure a ridiculous bag, but I'm very much about the win-win. And I do believe that you can do well and you can still come up, I was talking to my homegirl the other day, and like to some extent, I know that this is a paradox and contradictory, but it's like I'm a social capitalist, you know what I'm saying? Like I believe
Mm.
you can do social good and still to get the and still get the bag, except it's not just your bag, it's like you get a bag, you get a bag. Oprah, your girl, she's giving people cars. I think at one point she was like doing something, she's like, you get a car, you get a car, you got, well, you get a bag, you get a bag, you get a bag. That's what we're trying to do here, like together. How can we understand how this new world affords us in getting that bag? How can we build this new world in a way where there is a level of conscientiousness and morale in how we develop it, and how can we democratize access to understanding how to use it so that this epoch that we're in, it's definitely unequivocally a revolution, but it's one that bears the type of fruit that for generations to come we made the world a better place.
I think it's a renaissance age, right? I think it really is. It's an it's that era. It's like the era of like of so much birth, like so much opportunity and growth.
From the
These,
ashes rises the phoenix. From the ashes
yeah.
rises the phoenix. You're seeing the degradation of society in so many ways. Literally, the burning, burning, burning of this. From cities to all the atrocities that are being committed. And I think that is causing this like understanding of we're actually doing the worst that we've done in a very long time. And people are
Yeah.
getting woke up. People are waking up, okay? They are waking up and they're like, hold up, like this is where we at. So my thing is that I want to be on the side of the people calling everyone to have the seat at the table of upliftment, empowerment, inspiration, unity, enlightenment, and healing. And going back to my values, I talked about my vision, scaling empowerment globally. Going back to my values, like that pervades, every I try at least have that pervade every aspect of the way that I live life. And, I feel as though there's a responsibility to do better for myself and for, the communities that I serve, which is really the global, world, like the global community. So not to get on my soapbox, but I just want to close with, I am very much aware of what is happening in the world and above and beyond, the tech and how important it is to understand it and things of that nature. Whether you are talking about financial empowerment, technological empowerment, if you don't have the right mindset, you're not going to be able to build in a way that is sustainable, in a way that is healthy, in a way that is repeatable, and so on and so forth, right? So, I've been really diving deep into, I'm an endurance sport athlete. I'm a 4P triathlete. I'm about to do my next race May 18th. Jose, I don't even know if I told you, but I'm doing this thing called the Fancyfied Tri Challenge, TRI, and the trifecta of excellence
Mm,
is soul, mind, and body. And I mentioned that because I'm really with this mindset and engineering, inviting people to, think different. And how they're doing that is going through with me, of course, we're in this together, process of up leveling over the 30 days. And so I mention it also because it's like that's just giving you an idea of what I'm doing on the authentic intelligence front. Authentic intelligence speaks to the humanity at our core. It speaks to how your unique gifts and talents can be leveraged and harnessed, again that powerful word of harnessing, to add value in a personal and professional manner, to
mm,
the positive power of the people. I, one of my poems, be the positive power of the people. In service there is salvation. In service there is salvation. It's like mind engineering in a way that we're really accepting the responsibility of good stewardship, and that's for not only ourselves but our neighbors and the world at large. And that's what Fancyfied is doing, like,
mm.
in an operationalized way.
That is really interesting because you really have mastered this work around envisioning and being a part of this, wave of innovation in industry, but also in self. And that is really interesting that you are a leader in both of those spaces and that you're looking at it so holistically, but also looking at that transferred application. I think that's really, really fascinating. I I, I have a question. So, I know you get it, right? Like top 50 in crypto worldwide, top crypto female CEO. You all brought Crypto Tutors to Shark Tank. When you sit with folks that are so institutional in like their business work or understand like industry so well, do they when you talk about this, do they get it?
Interesting. The experience, and of course I'm under like ironclad NDA, but it was interesting because there's, we're B2B. Like we've
Mhm.
evolved to start unlocking B2C, and for that matter, B2G. But at the time we were B2B. And so you get mostly B2C. You get a lot of product on that show. You know what I'm saying? So that in and of
Mm,
itself was a very novel concept for
mhm,
that particular audience, right? And so,
mhm,
um, I say that to say, let's put it like this. We did what we came to do. Okay. Let's not. I mean, you can look at season 14, the premiere, you see us running out of the tank. So I'm not saying anything that's not available in the public domain. But what I found was sometimes when you're so far in the future, it can be hard, when you're a visionary, it can be hard to paint the picture of what it's going to be like because it's so far away, it seems, from the world that people are living in right now.
mhm,
And of course, by definition, being a futurist means that you see things that are not in existence per se, or maybe not to the extent that they will be. You know what I mean?
mhm,
And that is always a very tricky conversation because I have to like temper my technical with my like abstract with my application based with, it's a very calculated conversation. So in that regard with Shark Tank, as I said, we did what we came to do, but I often find that it can be difficult for people to connect the dots. And so that's why I try
mm,
to speak about, you know supply chain and logistics, for example, being able to ensure that a diamond is sourced from non-conflict caves and goes along the supply chain, and the legitimacy of its clarity is all encoded on chain. I'm just using this as an example because De Beers uses a
Yeah.
private blockchain for that.
Hmm.
Walmart uses blockchain to track its goods along the value chain, and they do that
Hmm.
because it's a very efficient, streamlined way of doing it. I'm not going to get into all the technical stuff, but I point that out because when you put it in those kinds of, paint that picture for people, they're like, oh, well, if Walmart is doing it, then there might be something to it. And so if they're saving money and they're doing it more efficiently and it's more
Yeah.
streamlined and optimal workflow, then it becomes a business case. So I think also too,
Yeah.
if you can tie business outcomes to explanations and help people understand how is it being used like in reality versus like
Yeah.
hypothetical, that makes it a lot easier to understand. But I had to learn that, Jose. I didn't know that off the rip.
That's interesting you say that because, like, I do agree. I think even in some of our work, I've started to learn that you sometimes have to create this understanding of immediacy in application, right? Like like, yeah. And that tethers it for some people that are maybe not as naturally futurists, right? Where they're like, I can follow this line of thinking because there's an immediate application that you can point to. And I think that's something that you learn, and that like you got to navigate that language for some folks. I think that's something that I can think of in the context of policy, talking policy
That's
with
exactly what I was going to say.
yeah, for like our work, where we have to kind of reel in this concept of like, where are we going to be in, like, the future of energy 50 years from now, when Gen Z is predominantly leading these industries, like, and then how do we get folks to kind of see that picture and see the path in front of them now, who are focused on the immediacy of like federal policy, right? Like, you gotta translate sometimes a little bit.
Can I add something to that? Because
Mhm.
we've done lobbying ourselves, especially during the previous administration, which here in the U.S. we're so anti-crypto. And the thing about it is, yes, I understand there have been a number of frauds, fraudulent activity, and fraud. But the reality is, like, all the nefarious use cases that they were alleging with Bitcoin, cash was actually the number one currency for shady boots and shady business. But neither here nor there. Saying
Yeah.
that to say, speaking with policymakers and also the age gap, like you're dealing with octogenarians and
Mm.
people who are very very they're 60s 70s 80s sometimes, and it's like explaining to them how this technology works, but the face of it, it's
Mhm.
not just hedge funds and this and that. It's like we're here because the barrier to entry is significantly lower. To buy Bitcoin, for example, you could go on a Cash App, a Coinbase, what have you. Those are centralized platforms, by the way. But just for example's sake and ease of use, you can use $5 and you could get some Bitcoin. And although today it's at 85,000, it was at 11,000 when I got into it. So do the math on the appreciation. Do the math if I would have stayed in the market, bought at 11,000. And even though there's been retracement this year, because at its peak it was
Mhm.
107,000, I think, or 109,000.
Mhm.
Um,
Mhm.
but my point is that, like, that's the mindset engineering that we're talking about. Understanding what is an
Yeah.
asset, understanding, oh, if I hold on to this and let it do its thing, based on the economics of there being a finite supply of 21 million units. I'm just using Bitcoin as an example because the maths,
Yeah.
and if the demand goes up and the supply is only this amount, 21 million, well, what's that going to do? It's going to drive up the prices. What's going to do with greater demand and limited supply? That is, by definition, a good deal.
Yeah. 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 I mean, it takes us back to like econ in high school, right? And I think that's something that's interesting. You talk about this openly, right? Like, with new technologies, there's always hesitation, because what happens when new technology comes? Like, there are bad actors, and I think that's something that, like, we have to speak about. It's important, especially with communities that historically get the shorter end of the stick. We got to talk about, like, how do you learn, how do you take advantage of amazing leaders like Crypto Tutors, who are educating and helping people navigate these systems and opportunities so that they are doing so from a place of education, from a place of understanding. I think that's really, really the key in getting folks to understand that digital transaction work, blockchain application, cryptocurrency, it's not something that's going away anytime soon. In fact, quite the opposite. We're seeing a lot of advancement in the way that governments around the world are starting to look at like further integrating or leveraging some of these technologies, understanding that as Gen Z comes up, as other generations start to further adjust and accommodate, our digital spending is only going to explode. It's going to continue to explode. And we're going to need systems to accommodate that, right? I mean, I can't tell you the last time that I had cash. I don't know. Like, thinking off the top of my head, I don't remember the last time I had cash in my
Say
wallet.
people are already using digital currency. When you
Mm-hmm.
talk about crypto, it's encrypted, which means that it's password protected. And that alphanumeric strand is that private key. And there's a public key when you want to send and receive. But my point is understanding the mechanics behind it allows you to be a participant, to be a active player, an active participant. And I've been in Congress and I've spoken to legislators. And the reason why I mentioned advocacy was because I also see that in order to go from the Web 2.0 world that we're living in right now, they call it the read write era. We need education to go to the third. And even in terms of the scamming, right? Like obviously consumer
Mm-hmm.
protection is vital, but understanding how to responsibly govern this new technology without stymieing innovation is a art and a science. It's going
Mm-hmm.
to require a co-creative process between the builders.
Yeah.
People like ourselves, like we're not just saying invest in this meme coin. We're saying, do you know what a meme coin is? Do you
Mm-hmm.
know how this meme phenomenon even gets its value? And how because people's trust, well, we decide that Pepe, that Doge, that Ethereum is going to be $1 trillion. Like I'm not saying that it is. I'm just using that as an example. But these meme
Mm-hmm.
coins be having like market caps of like a hundred billion. There was a Trump coin.
Mm-hmm.
There's a Melania
Mm-hmm.
coin. Saying that
Yeah,
to
that's right.
say the stewardship is vital. Understanding how to move in this virtual world is vital. And you're talking about Gen Z, and of course they're using these technologies, but what we also want to impress upon them is that the responsibility to manage responsibly and ethically, like it's on y'all. Like it's we need to keep that
Mm-hmm.
as a part of the standard, okay? Not the nice to have, okay? Because these technologies can also be extremely dangerous to your point. You're talking about the crypto industry has lost billions of dollars. There was a hack
Yeah.
for an exchange recently. It was like 1.5 billion. It's where is it?
You know, one of my favorite actresses, Viola Davis, just came out with a movie. Not to um, but
The superhero movie, right?
no. Well, okay, so I'm pretty sure this was when she was doing the recordings for like Woman King, which is an amazing movie. If no one's ever watched it, like please go watch it. But she did a movie. She did a movie recently that just launched on Amazon Prime called G20, which the premise of it is like there's the G20 come together, right? Um,
Yes, the Global 20. So for people that don't know, that's where the
mhm,
20 most powerful nations in the world come
yeah.
together. That should be coming up. That's going to be interesting with Trump in
The
office.
the 20, yes, the 20 largest economies come together. And in the movie, there is a bad actor trying to do damage to some of these markets through cryptocurrency. And it was an interesting film. I was watching it one because I love Viola Davis so much. Also, people call her the like Black Meryl Streep. Meryl Streep could never like she. No offense, I love Meryl Streep too. I really do.
But
Like Devil Wears
Viola
Prada is
Davis
one of
is
my
not
favorite
that.
movies.
Viola
Meryl
Davis.
S- Meryl Streep could not do what Viola Davis did in this movie. Like she was like kicking and fighting like I was gagged the whole time. It was an incredible movie. I love like action movies or like kind of superhero-y movies. Not like superhero, but like where there is a hero, right? And she plays the president of the United States in the movie,
Yes, yes, yes. Hmm.
and she was the hero of the story. Nobody came to say she saved herself. Like it was an amazing, amazing movie. Um, but there are these narratives out there, not to go off on too much of a tangent, that like there are concerns with bad actors, but to the extent that we also understand AI, right? Like there are scammers, professional scammers who are using AI to better target vulnerable populations for financial scams. When you have a new technology, when telephones came out, guess what started, right? Telephone scams. Like this, there's something to be said for the stewardship word, because good stewardship is how we create a better future and get a hold of and make sure we're managing and tampering down the bad actors. And I'm gonna speak on mantras right now, because one of your mantras is, if you want to predict the future, create it. And I really love that because um, I really love that because I think that's a direct,
That's my word.
like,
That's my phrase. I put that together. I mean, some other, people have said it a little bit differently, but like, yeah, if you want
I
to
think that's a rallying cry for Gen Z. I I think that's what you need to say to Gen Z, because it's like, if you want to create your future, create the future, and that it goes to being good stewards, right?
But you got to know what good stewardship is. Here's the thing about the responsibility of managing this digital landscape. It comes and begins with managing you, like going back to authentic intelligence. The reason why I codified this like mental model, this mental framework was because a system of self-governance is important. There are going to be times in life where our emotions may compromise our ability to think clearly. And because of that, we might make a decision that we regret. And so having a system of self-governance helps us determine how to, based on our understanding of what we think is right and wrong, what we think is advantageous, disadvantageous, etc., having that like system to work off of to help us make those decisions. It's like really important to have a way, a process, an approach. And the vein of stewardship stems from developing the ability to have that approach. And
Mhm.
you build on that foundation. So discernment, knowing how to function in a quote unquote good way. When we're talking about technology, at least it's to use it for the betterment of society. If you can teach people to even have that thought before they start building, they're going to think more specifically and innovatively around that particular issue. That's why the more people that can have the technical proficiency to use this technology to solve issues that are plaguing humanity, the more people that have these tools at their disposal, the more solutions we can create. And this is what I mean by the chain reaction that I mentioned in the beginning, like being a catalytic force. What does it look like? And this is a call to action for your audience, like being the change that you want to see is being a catalytic force. And if you don't know what that means, it just means that the domino has fallen, and the domino has fallen on the right side of the future. And what side do you want to stand on?
Ooh, yeah, mic drop. I mean, I really do think, I think that that's something that Gen Z does do well. They're very um, unapologetic, and I think they stand on, yeah, and I think that that gives me a lot of hope, and it gives me a lot of kind of like exciting emotion to see like how the future continues to be shaped. But I think that that call to action, that rallying cry is still important, because we got to keep ourselves focused, right? And like and centered.
And we're better together. I mean, I think that this is intergenerational. I don't
Mm,
think that anybody who understands right from wrong, and if you look at the state of the world, there's a lot of war, there's a lot of adversarial energy, there's a lot of divisiveness, fractionalization, fragmentation. I don't think anybody really feels like that's a good way to be. This is a good
yeah.
existence to just have this friction. I don't think anybody would say that, right?
Mm-mm.
Like if you're just objectively evaluating, right? So this is
Hmm.
where also too the call to action is to remember that we're better together. And a collective brain where we're creatively synthesizing good
Yeah.
ideas, is a great way to build a better tomorrow today. So I'm not trying to be super like abstract and just tell you that run sunshine and rainbows and whatever, but I'll tell you this, holding your peace, having again system of self-governance, but being able to hold your peace, being able to feel confident in your essence, where you know that all this madness is craziness is happening, but you don't have to be what you don't want to see. You can actually be what you want to see, and that will cause the domino to fall, and the domino after that, and the domino
Hmm.
after that, and then we can change the world.
There's a there's there's a really simple manifestation of that I think is interesting to kind of like look at as like a very cute and very endearing example. I don't know how many folks are familiar with that meme where the little girl draws the photo for her mom and she puts a little spot on her face and she was like, "Oh, is that my hyperpigmentation?" And then like the dad is laughing in the corner and the little girl's like, "Why is dad laughing?" And the mom's like, "He doesn't know anything. It's whatever. Like this is a beautiful drawing." Do you know what I'm talking about? That
I
like
do.
meme
It's a
video?
black. I think it's a black family.
Yes. And something clicked for me the other day when I saw that video translated into Spanish and into multiple other languages across the world. And I was like, wow, like this is our common humanity thread. Like this is a very small example,
Back to basics.
yeah, of how sometimes there's just something that really resonates with our humanity and like is woven and spreads across the world. And I thought that was such a, I know it's funny, and like the family recreated the meme recently, which I thought was really adorable. They actually have the original picture drawing framed. Um, but the way that it just brought people together, I just thought was so, and it's a family that was recording themselves in their home, but it just brought humanity together. Um,
Because we're
uh,
so much, humanity is more alike than we are different. And I think that's the narrative that we bought, this different, individualistic, capitalistic by any means necessary. And I do not believe in a world where it is not it is not win-win. Why would you want to? And again, if I want to be the change, if I want to see the change, I got to be the change. So I'm not coming on
mm,
and denying that there are all these atrocities happening and persecutions and genocides, and I'm not making light of these issues. These things are actually happening and they're horrible, but what I can
mhm,
do is exercise agency over what I have agency over, and that is myself. That is the way
mm,
that I think. That is the way that I act. That is the way that I interact with others. That is the way that I support others. That is the way that I don't support others. It's all, this is why it's so important to understand and have self awareness around how you're moving in this world. Like, I'm very clear on how I'm moving in this world, and the right people, the right opportunities, the right conversations, the right ideas, the right everything, gravitates towards me because I'm vibrating at a frequency where naturally I'm tuned into it. So it comes to me, but that's a concern. I tell people all the time, I say, I don't wake up like this. You know what I'm saying? I didn't wake up looking like, you see what I'm saying over here? I didn't wake up with the fit. Like, these are choices, right? And life is the combination, of choices, little choices made every single day. Who you are is who you decide to be, and every single decision that you make every single day for the rest of your life. And if you don't
w-
use that power wisely, you're not going to be happy with the person that you see and looking back at you in the mirror. And
yeah,
that's what this is as well, an invitation to remember that it's on you what ultimately you do. And I'm not saying bad things don't happen to us and whatnot again, but I'm just telling you that Jay-Z said it best. He said, "You could trap my body, but you cannot trap my mind." And I will go even further. You can't capture my spirit. It's unconquerable.
wow. This We're dropping so many powerful truths in the conversation that I think are so spiritually important for folks that, regardless of background, regardless of age, are thinking about like, how do I learn more? How do I expose myself to these spaces, these opportunities, these career pathways? we really are speaking to like principles of life. And I really love that. This is a fancified conversation.
You
It
know what I
really
think?
is.
Marcus Aurelius. Okay, so I listened to The Daily Stoic by Ryan Holiday. If no one is familiar with the book called Obstacle is the Way, it's a phenomenal read. It talks about character development through going through hardships and adversity and whatnot. But the Stoicism, this idea of sort of being like objective and as impartial as you can be, not being emotionally charged, trying to have a level of self-awareness that your biases are not like infiltrating your ability to evaluate the situation. And so, these Greek philosophers, I think it started with like Seneca. And Seneca was like Marcus Aurelius, for those of you who may not know, is like one of the greatest Roman emperors ever, and that is because he had one of the biggest Roman empires of any other Caesar, and he also had so many disparate like cultures that he was able to bring into the Roman Empire, and the way that he did it more or less kept the peace after the people had been conquered, which was
Mm.
a testament to his leadership, letting them keep their culture and what have you. So Marcus Aurelius would cite Seneca. And the reason that I'm saying this is because, I consider myself a modern day philosopher in many ways. I consider myself someone who has that sort of propensity to process information in a way that I can make complex topics and thoughts I try to be very digestible with it. But just look in terms of through the lens of how can we be better? How can we do better? And so I like to look at a
Yeah.
lot of the things that are unifying oriented. Everybody uses technology. Where was the last time you've
Mm.
been somewhere in the world and you didn't see a freaking phone, right? And so
Yeah.
that in and of itself is a connection point. That in and of itself is creating a bond from this device by virtue of you having it, I having it. So we're obviously doing the same actions on it because that's what gets done on it, right? So my
Hmm.
point is that with that comes an opportunity to build a bridge or to burn it. So it's
Yeah.
it's it's all about how do you want to, live in this world. And when you have the I want to build bridges energy like myself, I use digital bridges. I build digital bridges with crypto tutors. I build community bridges with, also crypto tutors with Fancyfied and just inviting people to leverage their unique gifts and talents to contribute to the world in a positive and constructive way. Build bridges in terms of conversations like this where we're
Yeah.
coming together from serendipitous encounter to I think very powerful conversation around how we are shaping and molding the future. So
Yeah.
each of us has a choice, and I like to say I took the stairs to heaven and not the elevator to hell.
I think that's really interesting you say that. I would I think the way that I kind of the narrative is painted in my head is technology is an exacerbator. Technologies in general over the course of human history are exacerbators. And yeah. Well, and I think they can be exacerbators for good or bad, right? And I think it goes off of the fact that like they're an extension of us and like us as individuals. Like we can choose to extend a hand to say hello or extend a hand to deliver a punch. And it really is incumbent on us as good stewards to make sure that we are utilizing technologies the right way.
What I'm excited to, I'm just excited for your, everything that you're doing, like you're a bridge builder, like honestly, that's what it's about. Like, think about bridges in human history. They brought us together, literally. They connected one side of the island to the other side of the island. Otherwise, you wouldn't have been
Yeah.
able to get through as easily. So, as I get ready to like, kind of wrap up my portion, I just want to
Yeah.
say that I thank you for the invitation to walk on this bridge with you. Obviously, this is the first conversation of many. I hope people that are listening realize that there's always a silver lining, and we're inviting you to ensure that that is so.
I'm going to ask you one final question before we wrap up here.
Okay.
Um, and it's our closeout question. It's one we ask everyone that comes on the podcast, and it is, what is your favorite tech tool and why? Your
Oh,
current favorite tech tool.
oh my God. I mean, I am super I use ChatGPT, I use Claude. I like to kind of bounce off prompts. So, from a tactical standpoint, I like to ask Claude to give me prompts that I will put into um, chat, for example, or, use Gemini. I like to use a rotation of those models to get the best information, so to speak. And so I like all of that. But let me tell you something, Gamma.ai is a presentation. I used to hate presentation. They used to bother me so much because I was like, I don't know how to start. And I'm like, not a graphics designer, but you can take text and you can copy and paste it. And Gamma will build a deck for you instantaneously and you can customize it. It's pretty sick. I really love that. I
Okay.
also like Perplexity, because, as a business owner, having data to, substantiate your business case and things of that nature, the data just makes it much more like, how do you say, um sound. The what
Mm,
you're proposing, it makes what you're proposing that much more sound because you have numbers to back it up and you can speak insightfully as to how those numbers play out. So Perplexity is also super dope. um Honestly, my
amazing.
favorite though is ChatGPT. You know why? Because they had well, there's Sora, so you've got the like text to image, generation, which is super cool, all like in the OpenAI kind of suite. And then with chat, the thing I like about it is that like it has a memory recall that has every single prompt that it's ever done for you. And so there's a level of personalization in terms of the engagement, and I use the voice activation feature. So like I talk to it. I'm like, I call it Aurora, and it has a kind of sister girl voice. I don't know how it chose that. I don't, maybe I chose it. I don't know. But and I talk to it all the time and I get advice on, a therapeutic oriented advice. Be careful with that. But it always has been helpful for me. I use it for like romantic advice. I use it for business advice. When I'm building new things, I'm like asking it just has a very interactive element to it that I don't find Gemini and Claude have, but I think I gave you like
Yeah.
4 or 5 AIs that I'm like in love with right
We'll
now.
take it. We're gonna flag all of those for everybody that's watching, because
Yo, get
it's
up on
important
Gamma
to
then.
know.
Hmm?
Yeah. Oh, I'm gonna check that out today. I'm excited about that one. Fancy, thank you for bringing the fire today. I knew you were gonna be amazing. You were amazing. You've shown us what it really looks like to lead with heart, to have bold vision, to like build a future actively. To our listeners, be sure to follow Fancy on all of the social medias. Check out her work with Crypto Tutors, Fancyfied, Authentic Intelligence. That's something that we will flag for folks as much as possible as things continue to roll out. Remember, if you want to predict the future, you got to go out and create it. Until next time, thank you so much. Thank you so much, Fancy. I hope you have a great rest of your day. This has been an amazing conversation.
Fancy Five certified. I'm honored and you're the best. And we are the blessed.